condescension, contempt, a superiority complex, and betrayal. The Western left or the global left Africa problem. So when we talk about the Western left or the left, mostly on the political side of things, we're talking about people who try to present themselves as those who are owning liberal values, progress, those who are putting themselves self forward as being progressive. You know, those who like to present themselves as presenting charity to people across the world. In the world today, there are a lot of chaos. We see the violent manifestation of imperialism throughout the world. But there's something strange about this left or these progressive forces that are speaking against this violent manifestation and so forth. And that is their Africa problem. Their problem being in solidarity with Africans. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stream Dialogue. This is another episode of Let's Reason. Today, we will talk about the Western left or global left. They like to call themselves progressive forces, Africa's problem. So, when we talk about solidarity versus charity, the Western, the left in the West like show to show charity, bring charity to when it comes to African issues and so forth. So rather than showing solidarity, and what do I mean by that? When when we talk about solidarity, solidarity is asking the oppressed or those who you are trying to help, presenting yourself as how I can help you, rather than charity, which means that this is what I will do for you. I don't care how my action will affect you. This is how I will help you. You can take it or leave it. So, furthermore, with solidarity, let's say I remember somebody used this scenario. You go, you see a lady. A lot of us from the Caribbean, especially those of us who grew up in the small towns, small villages, we didn't have electricity most times. So we didn't have things like washing machine. We had to go to the river or the spring to wash our clothes. Our parents, some of us, will, as young children, wash our clothes. So let's say in this case, charity. They say an NGO come by, they see all these women washing their clothes. They're like, huh, how can oh, I will help you. You're struggling by washing these clothes with your hand. Let me buy you a washing machine. That sounds generous, is it? Does it? Well, not quite. You buy the person a washing machine. Does that person have electricity? Can they pay, even if they have electricity, can they afford to pay the extra money to pay for the electricity? Number one. Um, if the machine get broken, how do you fix the machine? Rather than approaching those people and say, how can we help you? How can we, first of all, is this a burden to you? Is this a burden by washing your old children clothes? So it's not for you to say that this is a burden. But that is what we call solidarity versus charity. Solidarity is standing with the oppressed rather than standing for the oppressed. Just standing for the oppressed. So during this time, I won't mention, we can get censored a lot, but let's say there are a lot of conflict happening throughout the world. Let's focus. There there are conflict happening in Sudan, in the DRC. And one of the things I notice traveling the internet, mainstream media, like I said, we're not gonna focus on that. We don't expect anything from them. Congo and the DRC, I'm sorry, Congo and Sudan, where these are African people being, you know, taken out en masse, just like anywhere else in the world. We have starvation, other whatever atrocity you can think of. Congo and DRC are not given this, focus that it rightly deserve, and so are the other um, violent manifestation of imperialism, because imperialism doesn't discriminate. Well, it discriminates strategically, but when it comes to violence, when it decides to perpetuate its violence, it doesn't discriminate as long as you stand in its way. But still, why? Because we have a normalization of African oppression, brutality against Africans, African suffering throughout throughout the throughout the world. So these people doesn't feel the need to stand with African with stand stand with African people. And these people, we call it the charity, or they rather offer charity out of their savior complex. We always talk about this color savior complex where they have, and I believe in places like the RC that is not going to fly today. So you don't see them pushing that as well. And their superiority complex. We talk about that. Or when it comes to the isms, the race, and then down the road you add the isms. A lot of these groups during their they suppress their ism or mask their ism by providing, like I said, charity. They come to Africa, they travel throughout the Caribbean as NGOs and so forth while serving the imperialists. And yes, there are a lot of people who personally, individuals, I would say, that might have it as a thought, as genuinely feel for African people and the suffering for African people, but still, this global left, this Western left, has been co-opted, bribed, which we will get to later. What do I mean by bribe? To ignore a lot of suffering of African people. So when it comes to African issue, let's say the political side of things, as you can see in the Sahel and so forth, a lot of Western progressive activists, as I would call them, you see them online. I will not call them call their names. Um, you don't see them inviting Africans as much with an African perspective, an African point of view to explain where things are going and how these people can support a lot of you know this new African push for freedom, these new revolutions that are popping up in the continent. And this is what will go back in their superiority complex, where they don't have the time to step back and listen. you know um African political ideas are normally ignored. So whether some people want to call themselves socialists, this and that, uh, the African cannot take whatever they're saying and apply the Africanity to it. A lot of these socialist organization or whatever they want to call themselves, You as African, you cannot bring your African values to these things. It has to be what they imagine this ideology to be. It cannot be adapted as the Chinese did. The Chinese adapted to their reality and they created a system that suits them. So these are some of the what I call the contempt they have for African you know African, let's say, political views, and also the cultural aspect, the African culture in a lot of these so-called progressive, left, liberal. I put them all together. Some try to separate themselves, but when it comes to African issue, they are the same. The intention might not be the same, but the outcome is the same. Sometimes we say it's not it's not the intention, but it's the outcome of what you're trying to do. And we see a lot of contempt for African culture. There are things that are being pushed by a lot of these so-called left progressive forces on African that are not culturally acceptable to Africa. They themselves will push if an African state pass a law, like in Burkina Faso, they pass a certain law and it doesn't agree align with their value, then no, the Burkina Revolution then become the enemy of these people. And yes, they like the dance, they like the 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 tangible stuff, but they don't like the political stuff, the political cultural side of Africa when it when that is being firmly pushed by African. So these are some of the things we talk about. And when you hear African being mentioned by a lot of these people, they cite the suffering of African. Normally they only cite the suffering. They like to cite the suffering, but they cite it in a way that this is normal. This is just these poor Africans. They they're suffering, but nobody can do anything about it. Just let them suffer. We let them. And when we get to the betrayal part, which is uh very serious. This one is very serious. You look in let's say the United States, where a lot of these groups um they like to push their issues with, let's say, the African American community, and when they are bribed, so they push their issue with the African American issue. A lot of issues that affect African American, and also equate it in a lot of sense. When they are bribed, when the powers that be, decide to say, all right, you guys are making too much noise. Let me just give you some of what you want. Maybe not all of what you want. Let me just give you some. All of a sudden, the issues that affect the black community are not taken care of. These people then disappear. They disappear. And you will see that a perfect example in Haiti. Yes, the earthquake. We spoke about the earthquake in Haiti that caused massive damage. The country basically collapsed. But still, when we talk about charity again, a lot of charity was given to Haiti. But that charity that went into Haiti, let's say money, no one asked no one asked the Haitians how this money can help you. What can we do with the money to help? I'm sure there was in my, I'm probably, probably there was a lot of this so-called aid that went in. We hear rumors, a lot of allegations about corruption, not just corruption from Haitian themselves, but big, people that, you know, that put themselves as being, the most righteous people on this earth. Those people. I just don't want to call any names, like I said. We're just getting started out there. But it's out there. Look up the aid that was provided to Haiti. And this is throughout the Caribbean. Whenever these people said they're offering aid or charity, I will call it, this is not done out of solidarity. It's done to, this savior complex, and I would say it is done throughout racism as well, and that is a huge betrayal. We talk about the atrocities that happen in Darfur, which we are seeing a repeat today. This guy has a identity crisis. He's in Sudan, the Bashir regime or whatever his name was. This guy in Sudan carried out huge atrocity against people in the Darfur region, and we see the same people coming back, carrying out the same atrocities again, and yet still the world remains silent. The so-called, left progressive forces of in the West especially, they are, silent, and DRC as well. For decades, a lot of these atrocities been happening in the DRC, and there's something in particular why the West, like why the left, global left or Western left, don't want to put this issue or take up this issue of Africa to the forefront. They themselves understand that Africa supply of raw materials, cheap raw materials, to a lot of big economies, allow them to receive a certain lifestyle that they are being bribed with. And now I will get to the bribing side of it. So when we talk about them being bribed, you know, these multinationals, these big oligarchies in the, let's say, the West, realize that they have to provide their people with at least a better life than what people, let's say, in Africa and the most global South country are getting. Because if not, people can recognize suffering. When you start to suffer the way you see somebody suffer, it's easier to be in solidarity with those people, right? If somebody, you know, something happened to somebody, and you're like, whoa, that happened to me recently, then you might not understand fully, but you guys can come to an agreement, and you can move forward together and tackle that problem. So that is what the West, that's what happened in the West, especially after, and this is where it started, after World War I, what they call World War I. Most of the world was colonies. So after World War I, and then when you look at it, the West was looting in Africa for a long time. They were looting the world for a long time, but still, in the Western world, a lot of these Western empire, the population suffered. Like the majority of the population. Sorry, if you spoke, if you read about England, like in the Industrial Revolution, where at one point they were using even child labor. After they abolished slavery, they then start using child labor in England. Children were being, you know, children were, let's say, they didn't grow up to be adult. to the terrible condition they had in the factories. And this is where the betrayal can go. Today, a lot of people working class in the West are feeling, you know, feeling a lot of suffering, a lot of the privilege a lot of people had, privilege a lot of people have are being taken away. Healthcare is really it's really hard to afford healthcare, housing, the cost of living, all that stuff you used to get, you're not getting it as easy as before. So instead of using this to stand in solidarity with other peoples around the world, I believe that us, like, well, not, I live in the West, of course, but people this time around, people of the global south will have to approach the Western left with caution, meaning we have to look out that let's say the system I try to bribe them again with something, they can betray, and you can see that with this demonization of, let's say, immigrants. Instead of looking to say, wait, well, let me not go there. One of the things they're pushing in the West, the propaganda they're pushing there, that the reason why this privilege that they had, this bribe that I believe they had, is being taken away is because of immigrants. And the jobs that a lot of immigrants have are not necessarily the jobs that a lot of people in the West want. But I won't go too much into that. And a lot of this what I call bribe goes beyond just the material side. We spoke about being able to afford, a car, a house, the white picket fence. But a lot of this has to do with even safety. There's conflict in the DRC. There's conflict in Sudan. One of the things that a lot of imperialist powers like to push is that it's safe, you know, it's safe here. At least you're not them. So this is where the superiority complex comes in. When they see you that you're from a place that is riddled with conflict, crime, all that stuff. Not knowing a lot of these conflicts are, facilitated by these imperialist powers. So, ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about the African struggle, uh, this is why we say we need a global Pan African movement. So African people can stand in solidarity with each other throughout the world. There's a lot of division being facilitated online. It takes intelligence not to fall for that stuff. Some of it can get in your skin. That's that's why it's being pushed. But when it comes to the so-called progressive force, we see a lot of protests on behalf of a lot of we see a lot of protests on behalf of a lot of people that are struggling toward the world, and we commend those protests and we commend people speaking out. But it's up for us. I will say that we speak on Sudan, and we have to speak on the positive stuff that are happening. Sometimes this negative stuff can get really draining, but you should, by ignoring a lot of the stuff that are happening in the Sudan, in DRC, you lose your humanity. Once you ignore it, you lose your humanity, and you lose your that thing that make you African by standing in solidarity with other Africans. And when it comes to this this Western left, as I like to call it, we should not look for them to put these issues on the forefront, to lead the fight against these issues. The most they will do is call somebody like Paul Kagame a dictator. But it's up to us Africans to say yes. This word of dictator are being overused. But I would say yes, the Kagame regime, the Rwandan regime, the regime that occupies Rwanda now and Uganda is definitely causing mass suffering again, for the people of Congo. But still, these people will not be able to accomplish their mission had it not if they are not being backed by the imperialists. So at the end of the day, global the people of the world need each other, just as the people, African people, whether you're in the Caribbean, you're in South America, Brazil, you know, North, whether you're in Colombia, wherever you are, we need each other on the continent. We need each other. I would say we will still have to work with this Western left, but we cannot approach it the way it was approached in the past by putting too much emphasis on them leading our struggle. Actually, putting the message out there. This is what people like us are trying to do. We need to understand what is happening in Sudan and how we can reach out to Sudan. Sudanese need to start speaking up. Congolese need to start speaking up. I don't want to go to CNN and know what's going on in the Congo. I don't want to go to what you would call RT, Russia Today. And that's another thing. We speak about the Western media, but I am somebody who read a lot of stuff, whether it's a lot of media, even Al Jazeera. You look, it's like they're no different from the West. But when you talk about a agency like RT, Russia Today, believe it or not, the Western standard is so bad, but still, they does not cover Africa in a glorious light. It's always some wild story they're putting out there about Africa. It might not be as bad as the West, but they're putting out stuff that doesn't speak to us. Yes, they have. I think Professor Lumumba is like having a show, but still, it's not speaking how Africa should speak of itself. So, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if I got sidetracked on this, on this, on this video, but the Western left can be bribed. That is what they call. That is what they can call the middle class or whatever. You know, it's funny that the atrocity been happening in Congo, in the DRC, and up until a few years ago, people were comfortable. People were so comfortable. It's when they're uncomfortable they start to see, barely start to see, you know, a lot of these things, but still, you don't know which way they're going to swing, because you see the demonization of minority groups, and that is a thing that happens in the West, and this is where we have to be careful. Whenever the West has a problem, this ruling class like to demonize and blame some minority. It's always some minority that get blamed for their problem. It's not their policy, it's not their system that they use that seems to just take. It's always somebody else's fault. So, ladies and gentlemen, we always put the the responsibility on African people. A lot of us do this thing is not because we, want to put our face online. We're not all that handsome, good looking, but still, this is a must. We have to speak out against, the atrocities that are happening in Sudan, you know, and the African intellectuals have failed us. A lot of them are trying to please their Western counterparts. They're trying to sound as smart, so they like to compromise on their their belief. They're being afraid to be labeled as radical. There's nothing radical of wanting freedom and justice for the African continent and the African people around the world who have been facing injustice for centuries. And we know who is causing this injustice. Today it's like people who have been committing these atrocities, these people have been committing this injustice against Africans for the past, at least, let's say, 500 years. Today are doing the same thing, but except they're doing more in a covert way, I would say. And they want us to pretend like things are not happening. The least we can do is say, hey, what you're doing is wrong and it needs to stop. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for joining Let's Reason.